And we're live. And shockingly, I'm right on time. Look at that. Never been on time for anything in my life. Except maybe birth. I don't know. Mom, was I on time for birth? I have no idea. Just waiting for people to show up. Oh, there's one. No, I'm not. I am not late, Angela Cordero. Not even a little bit. In fact, I was right on time, and I logged it as right on time. So, I was taking my time to brush my teeth, like you guys can smell my breath as I'm reading you Harry Potter. Can you smell my breath? It smells like mint. I don't know. It's fucking weird. It's like, oh my god, I'm going on Facebook Live. I'm reading a book. I need to brush my teeth. What? I don't know. I'm weird. Oh, I have 3 viewers now. Sorry. I'm getting comfy, making my bed, adjusting my stuffed animals. You know, it's like when you go to the library and the teacher's got that really cool chair. I did. I also put Bosom Buddy on my lips. What's your point? Nice and tingly. What, Damon? Are you going to listen to me read tonight? Because everybody on Facebook can hear you right now.
Sure. Can I also get dinner roll?
Sure. Freya, out. Close the door. Apparently now I'm... Oh, well, now he doesn't want to. Okay, whatever. Whatever, child. Okay. I got my blankie. I got my coffee. Smell nice. I don't think I need any gum right now. I'll be okay. Alright, so where did we leave off? Did I mark the page? I did. Good job, Danny. Is everybody ready? Is Manny listening? Is your dad listening? Okay. So, we left off where they had just arrived at Hogwarts. They haven't even gone through the Sorting Hat ceremony yet. That's where we're starting off. We are on chapter 7, the Sorting Hat. You want to see a little... Do you want me to wait for Grandpa? Like, is he on the way from the bathroom? Or is he on the way from work? Where is he on the way from? Are we talking we're waiting a few minutes? Are we talking we're waiting an hour? Because I'm going to start. And he'll just have to rewatch it later. Okay, that's fine. I'll start. Okay, so, the Sorting Hat, the little imp thingy, kind of looks like me, right? Okay. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. The first years, Professor McGonagall, said Hagrid. Thank you, Hagrid. I'll take them from here. She pulled the door wide open. The entrance hall was so big you could have fit the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather close together. Wait, I missed a word there. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because, while you're here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house's common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are here at Hogwarts, your triumphs will earn you your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you're waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened around his left ear, and on Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously tried to flatten his hair. "I shall return when you are ready," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly. When we are ready, sorry. Damon, go let Freya in here, I guess."
Okay.
My child and the dog are joining me this evening.
Yes, I've been just laying down at the door. I mean, not at the door, but wall.
Really?
Yeah, just like laying right here.
Oh, yeah, I know that. No, you're not getting on the bed. Sit. You guys want to see the dog? There's a child.
Hello?
There's Freya. Alright.
She's not even a year old.
Okay. You guys are very distracting this evening. She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us into houses?" he asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred said it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? He didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he have to do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she'd learned and wondering which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous. Never. Not even when he'd had to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying how he'd turned the teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would come back and lead him to his doom. And then something happened that made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just streamed through the back hall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room talking to one another and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." "My dear Friar, haven't we given Peeves all the chances he deserves? He gives us all a bad name, and you know, he's not really even a ghost. I say, what are you all doing here?" A ghost wearing a ruff and tights had suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. "New students," said the fat friar, smiling down at them. "About to be sorted, I suppose." A few people nodded mutely. "Hope to see you in Hufflepuff," said the friar. "My old house, you know." "Move along now," said a sharp voice. "The sorting ceremony is about to start." Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. "Now, form a line," Professor McGonagall told the first years, "and follow me." Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in mid-air along 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering gold plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here, so that they came to a halt in a line facing the other students, with the teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in the flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghosts shone misty silver. Mainly to avoid all the staring eyes, Harry looked upward and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a History." It was hard to believe that was a ceiling at all, that the Great Hall didn't simply open up into the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she placed a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in the house. Maybe they had to try and get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought. That seemed the sort of thing. Noticing that everybody in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened wide like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. "Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave of heart, their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindor apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet, in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap." The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables, and then became quite still again. "So, you've just got to try on a hat?" Ron whispered to Harry. "I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll." Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on the hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he did wish they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would be the one for him. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward holding a large roll of parchment. "When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted," she said. "Abbott Hannah." A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her eyes, and sat down. A moment's pause. "Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sit down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at her. "Bones, Susan." "Hufflepuff!" shouted the hat again. Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. "Boot, Terry." "Ravenclaw." The table second from the left clapped this time. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. "Brocklehurst, Mandy," went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender was the first new Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brothers catcalling. Bulstrode Millicent then became a Slytherin, became a Maleficent. Oh my goodness. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination. After all he'd heard about Slytherin. But they didn't look like an unpleasant lot. Harry was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his old school. He had always been last to be chosen, not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dudley to think they liked him. Jesus. Finch, Fletchley, Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes, Harry noticed, the hat shouted out the name at once, but at others it took a little while longer to decide. Finnegan Seamus, the sandy-haired boy next to Harry in line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the school and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor! Shouted the hat. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're very nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said that there had obviously been a mistake and he'd better get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. When it finally shouted Gryffindor, Neville ran off still wearing it, and had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swaggered forward when his name was called, and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin! Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Knott, Parkinson, then a pair of twins called Patel and Patel, and then Perks, Sally Ann, and then, at last, Potter! Harry! As Harry stepped forward, whispers suddenly broke out like little hisses of fire all over the hall. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? The last thing Harry saw before the hat dropped over his eyes was the hall full of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the black inside of the hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes. And a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edges of the stool and thought, Not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness, no doubt about that. No? Well, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor! Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the whole hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen and not put in Slytherin, he hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheer. Percy the prefect got up and shook his hand vigorously, while the Weasley twins yelled, We got Potter! We got Potter! Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the ruff that he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry the sudden horrible feeling he'd just been plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him the thumbs up. Harry grinned back. And there, in the center of the high table, in a large gold chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card that he'd gotten out of the Chocolate Frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar in a large purple turban. And now there were only 3 people left to be sorted. Thomas Dean, a black boy, even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green by now. Harry crossed his fingers under the table, and a second later the hat had shouted, Gryffindor! Harry clapped loudly with the rest as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. Well done, Ron. Excellent, said Percy Weasley pompously across from Harry as Zabini Blaze became a Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had only just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms open wide, as if nothing could have pleased them more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Nitwit, Blunder, Oddment, Tweak. Thank you." He sat back down. Everyone clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. "Is he a bit mad?" he asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad," said Percy airily. "He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry?" Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he liked to eat on one table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon, and steak, boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs. The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except the peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. "That does look good," said the ghost in his ruff sadly, watching Harry cut up his steak. "Can't you?" No, I haven't eaten for nearly 400 years, said the ghost. "I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself." Oh my goodness. Okay. "Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Poppington at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower." "I know who you are," said Ron suddenly. "My brothers told me about you. You're Nearly Headless Nick." "I would prefer if you called me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy," the ghost began stiffly, but sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. "Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless?" Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if their little chat wasn't going at all the way he wanted. "Like this," he said irritably. Stop. He seized his left ear and pulled. That's my left. His whole head swung off his neck and fell onto his shoulder as if it was on a hinge. Somebody had obviously tried to behead him and not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, Nearly Headless Nick flipped his head back onto his neck, coughed, and said, "So, new Gryffindors! I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have gotten the cup 6 years in a row. The bloody Baron's becoming almost unbearable. He's the Slytherin ghost." Harry looked over at the Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there, with blank, staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who, Harry was pleased to see, didn't look too pleased with the seating arrangements. "How did he get covered in blood?" asked Seamus with great interest. "I've never asked," said Nearly Headless Nick delicately. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkling clean as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of. Apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, and jam donuts. Trifles, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. Harry helped himself to a treacle tart. Then the talk turned to their families. "I'm half and half," said Seamus. "Me dad's a Muggle. Mom's a witch. She didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him." The others laughed. "What about you, Neville?" said Ron. "Well, my gran brought me up, and she's a witch," said Neville. "But the family thought I was all Muggle for ages. My great-uncle Algy kept trying to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of a Blackpool pier once. I nearly drowned. But nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Algy came over for dinner, and he was hanging me out of the upstairs window by the ankles when my great-auntie Enid offered him a meringue, and he accidentally let me go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and onto the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying, she was so happy. And you should have seen their faces when I got in here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great-uncle Algy's so pleased he bought me my toad. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration, you know. Turning something into something else. Of course, it's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just matches into needles, that sort of thing. Harry was starting to feel warm and sleepy. He looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and a sallow face. It happened very suddenly. The hook-nosed teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes. A sharp, hot pain shot across the scar on Harry's forehead. Ouch! Harry clapped a hand to his head. What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. Are you really asking me to show you my boobs right now? It's a turtle. See the legs? And the head? And it's a hibiscus flower.
What the heck?
Okay, I don't know who just joined. I'm sorry. They asked to see my tattoo. I wasn't putting my boob on the screen on purpose, I swear. Damon's dying of laughter on the floor right now. Okay. Can I go back to the book? Now your mother's seen my tattoo. It's not a spider. It's a turtle. You just made me show my boobs on Facebook. What's wrong with you? It's a turtle.
Yes, it is a turtle.
Okay, where was I? Alright, I need more chapstick now.
You were close to the part where Harry was feeling a little bit sleepy.
What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. The pain had gone as quickly as it had come. Harder to shake off was the feeling Harry had gotten from the teacher's look. A feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's that teacher talking to Professor Quirrell? He asked Percy. Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape. Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last, the desserts too disappeared, and Professor Dumbledore got to his feet again. The hall fell silent. Just a few more words now that we're all fed and watered. I have a few start-of-term notices to give you. First year should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils, and a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Quidditch trials will be held in the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right side is out of bounds to everyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was one of the few who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Percy. Must be, said Percy, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd, because he never really gives us reasons why... Because he usually gives us reasons why we're not allowed to go somewhere. The forest's full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I do think he might have told us prefects, at least. And now, before you go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teacher's smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick, as if he was trying to get a fly off the end. A little white ribbon flew out of it, which rose high above the tables, and twisted itself snake-like into words. Everyone pick their favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. Oh my God, do I have to sing? And the school bellowed. Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy, Warty Hogwarts, teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bold or young with scabby knees. Our heads could do with filling with some interesting stuff. For now they're brave, they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. That's one hell of a school song. Everybody finished the song at different times. At last, only the Weasley twins were left singing along in a very slow funeral march. Oh, God. Dumbledore conducted their last few lines with his wand, and when they finished, he was one of those who clapped loudest. Ah, music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. The Gryffindor first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out of the great hall and up the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like lead again, but only because he was so tired and full of food. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that Percy led them straight through doorways hidden behind sliding panels and hanging tapestries. They climbed more staircases, yawning and dragging their feet. And Harry was just wondering how much further they had to go when they came to a sudden halt. A bundle of walking sticks was floating in midair ahead of them. As Percy took a step toward them, they started throwing themselves at him. Peeves, Percy whispered to the first years. A poltergeist. He raised his voice. Peeves, show yourself! A loud, rude sound like the air being let out of a balloon answered. Do you want me to go to the Bloody Baron? There was a pop, and a little man with wicked dark eyes and a wide mouth appeared, floating cross-legged in the air, clutching the walking sticks. Oh, he said in an evil chuckle. Ickle first years, what fun! He swooped suddenly at them. They all ducked. Go away, Peeves, or the Baron will hear about this. I mean it, barked Percy. Peeves stuck out his tongue and vanished, dropping the walking sticks on Neville's head. They heard him zooming away, rattling coats of armor as he passed. You want to watch out for Peeves, said Percy, as they set off again. The Bloody Baron's the only one who can control him. He won't even listen to us prefects. Ah, here we are. At the very end of the corridor hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. Password, she said. Caput Draconis, said Percy, and the portrait swung forward to reveal a hole in the wall. They all scampered through it. Neville needed a leg up, and found themselves in the Gryffindor common room, a cozy round room full of squashy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through one door to their dormitory, and the boys through another. At the top of the spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their beds at last. 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up. Too tired to talk much, they pulled on their pajamas and fell into bed. Great food, isn't it? Ron muttered to Harry through the hangings. Get off, Scabbers! He's chewing my sheets. Harry was going to ask Ron if he's had any of the treacle tart, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much, because he had a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once because it was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened painfully. And there was Malfoy laughing at him as he was strangled with it. And then Malfoy turned into the hook-nosed teacher Snape, whose laugh became high and cold. There was a burst of green light. Harry woke sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again. And when he woke the next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. Hey, Tippy. Well, we are about to start chapter 8 right now. The Potion Master. Let me take a quick drink here again. Damon, if you're going to continue watching, you need to stop jumping up and down because you're making my eyes shake when you do it. Ah. And that's going to make the camera shake. Stop. Okay.
Just trying to push her out.
Okay. Are we ready? Alright. Chapter 8. The Potions Master. There! Look! Where? Next to the kid with the red hair. Wearing the glasses? Do you see his face? Did you see his scar? Whispers followed Harry from the moment he left his dormitory the next day. People lining up outside the classroom stood on tiptoes to get a look at him, or doubled back to pass him in the corridors again, staring. Harry wished they wouldn't, because he was trying to concentrate on finding his way to classes. There were 142 staircases at Hogwarts. Wide ones, sweeping ones, narrow, rickety ones, some that led somewhere different on a Friday, some with a vanishing step halfway up that you had to remember to jump. There were doors that wouldn't open unless you asked politely or tickled them in exactly the right places. Doors that weren't really doors at all, but a solid wall just pretending. It was all very hard to remember where anything was, because it all seemed to move around a lot. The people in the portraits kept going to visit each other, and Harry was sure the coats of armor could talk. The ghosts didn't help much either. It was always a nasty shock when one of them glided suddenly through a door you were trying to open. Nearly Headless Nick was always happy to point new Gryffindors in the right direction, but Peeves the Poltergeist was worth 2 locked doors and a trick staircase if you met him when you were late for class. He would drop waste paper baskets on your head, pull rugs from under your feet, pelt you with bits of chalk, or sneak up behind you, invisible, grab your nose, and screech, "Ha! Gotcha, conk!" Even worse than Peeves, if that was possible, was the caretaker, Argus Filch. Harry and Ron managed to get on the wrong side of him on their very first morning. Filch found them trying to force their way through a door that unluckily turned out to be the entrance to the out-of-bounds corridor on the 3rd floor. He wouldn't believe they were lost, was sure they were trying to break into it on purpose, and was threatening to lock them in the dungeons when they were rescued by Professor Quirrell, who was passing. Filch owned a cat called Mrs. Norris, a scrawny, dust-colored creature with bulging lamp-like eyes just like Filch's. She patrolled the corridors alone. Break a rule in front of her, put just one toe out of line, and she'd whisk off for Filch, who'd appear, wheezing, 2 seconds later. Filch knew the secret passageways of the school better than anyone, except perhaps the Weasley twins, and could pop up as suddenly as any of the ghosts. The students all hated him, and it was the dearest ambition of many to give Miss Norris a good kick. And then, once you had managed to find them, there were the classes themselves. There was a lot more to magic, as Harry quickly found out, than waving your wand and saying a few funny words. You had to study the night skies through their telescopes every Wednesday at midnight, and learn the different names of stars and the movements of the planets. 3 times a week, they went out to the greenhouse behind the castle to study herbology, with a dumpy little witch called Professor Sprout, where they learned how to take care of all the strange plants and fungi and found out what they were used for. Easily the most boring class was History of Magic, which was the only class taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been a very Are you quite comfortable?
She just got up.
You guys got to see this.
She's just sitting.
She said, Mom, I want to hear the story too.
He doesn't lay down on it.
She knows she's not supposed to be on the bed. Okay. Easily the most boring class was History of Magic, which was the only one taught by a ghost. Professor Binns had been very old indeed when he had fallen asleep in front of the staff room fireplace, and he got up the next morning to teach, leaving his body behind him. Binns droned on and on while they scribbled down names and dates and got Eremic the Evil and Ulrich the Oddball mixed up. Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher, was a tiny little wizard who had to stand on a pile of books to see over his desk. Hey, he's like me.
Oh, I know that.
At the start of their first class, he took the roll call, and when he reached Harry's name, he gave an excited little squeak and toppled out of sight. Professor McGonagall was again different. Harry had been quite right to think she wasn't a teacher to cross. Strict and clever, she gave them a talking to the moment they sat down in her first class. Transfiguration is one of the most complex and dangerous magics you will learn at Hogwarts, she said. Anyone messing around in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned. Then she changed her desk into a pig and back again. They were all very impressed and couldn't wait to get started, but soon realized they weren't going to be changing the furniture into animals for a long time. After taking a lot of complicated notes, they were each given a match and started to try to turn it into a needle. By the end of the lesson, only Hermione Granger had made any difference to her match. Professor McGonagall showed the class how it had gone all silver and pointy and gave Hermione a rare smile. The class everyone had really been looking forward to was a defense against the dark arts. But Quirrell's lesson turned out to be a bit of a joke. His classroom smelled strongly of garlic, which everyone said was to ward off a vampire he'd met in Romania, and was afraid of coming back to get him one of these days. His turban, he told them, had been given to him by an African prince as a thank you for getting rid of a troublesome zombie, but they weren't sure they believed the story. For one thing, when Seamus Finnegan asked eagerly to hear how Quirrell had fought off the zombie, Quirrell went pink and started talking about the weather. For another, they had noticed that a funny smell hung around the turban, and the Weasleys insisted that it was stuffed full of garlic as well, so that Quirrell was protected wherever he went. Harry was very relieved to find out that he wasn't miles behind everyone else. Lots of people had come from Muggle families, and like him, hadn't had any idea they were witches or wizards. There was so much to learn that even people like Ron didn't have much of a head start. Friday was an important day for Harry and Ron. They finally managed to find their way to the Great Hall for breakfast without getting lost once. "What have we got today?" Harry asked Ron as he poured sugar on his porridge. "Double potions with the Slytherins," said Ron. "Snape's head of Slytherin House. They say he always favors them. We'll be able to see if that's true." "Wish McGonagall favored us," said Harry. Professor McGonagall was head of Gryffindor House, but it hadn't stopped her from giving them a huge pile of homework the day before. Just then, the mail arrived. Harry had gotten used to this by now, but it had given him a bit of a shock the first morning, when hundreds of owls had suddenly streamed into the Great Hall during breakfast, circling the tables until they saw their owners, and dropping letters or packages onto their laps. Hedwig hadn't brought Harry anything so far. She sometimes flew in to nibble his ear or have a bit of toast before going off to sleep in the owlery with the other school owls. This morning, however, she fluttered down between the marmalade and the sugar bowl and dropped a note onto Harry's plate. Harry tore it open at once. It said in very untidy scrawl, "Dear Harry, I know you get Friday afternoons off, so would you like to come and have a cup of tea with me at around 3? I want to hear all about your first week. Send us an answer back with Hedwig. Signed, Hagrid." Harry borrowed Ron's quill and scribbled, "Yes, please, see you later," on the back of the note and sent Hedwig off again. It was lucky that Harry had tea with Hagrid to look forward to, because the potion lesson turned out to be the worst thing that had happened to him so far. At the start of term banquet, Harry had gotten the idea that Professor Snape disliked him. By the end of the first potions lesson, he knew he'd been wrong. Snape didn't dislike Harry, he hated him. Potion lessons took place down in one of the dungeons. It was colder here than up in the main castle, and would have been quite creepy enough without the pickled animals floating in glass jars all along the walls. Snape, like Flitwick, started the class by taking the roll call, and like Flitwick, he paused at Harry's name. "Ah, yes," he said softly. "Harry Potter, our new celebrity." Draco Malfoy and his friends Crabbe and Goyle snickered behind their hands. Snape finished calling the names and looked up at the class. His eyes were black like Hagrid's, but they had none of Hagrid's warmth. They were cold and empty and made you think of dark tunnels. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making," he began. He spoke in barely more than a whisper, but they caught every word. Like Professor McGonagall, Snape had a gift of keeping the class silent without effort. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you'll really understand the beauty of the softly shimmering cauldron or its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind and snaring the senses. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't a big bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." More silence followed this little speech. Harry and Ron exchanged looks with raised eyebrows. Hermione Granger was on the edge of her seat, looking desperate to start proving that she wasn't a dunderhead. "Potter!" said Snape suddenly. "What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "Powdered root of what to an infusion of what?" Harry glanced at Ron, who looked as stumped as he was. Hermione's hand shot into the air. "I don't know, sir," said Harry. Snape's lips curled into a sneer. "Tut, tut. Fame clearly isn't everything." He ignored Hermione's hand. "Let's try again. Potter, where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" A bezoar. How do you say that? Bezoar? Bezoar? Hermione's hand stretched high into the air as it would go, without leaving her seat. But Harry didn't have the faintest idea what a bezoar was. He tried not to look at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, who were shaking with laughter. "I don't know, sir." "Thought you wouldn't open a book before coming, eh, Potter?" Harry forced himself to keep looking straight into those cold eyes. He had looked through his book at the Dursleys, but did Snape expect him to remember everything in 1,000 magical herbs and fungi? Snape was still ignoring Hermione's quivering hand. "What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane?" At this point, Hermione stood up, her hair stretching towards the dungeon ceiling. "I don't know," said Harry quietly, "but I think Hermione does, though. Why don't you try her?" A few people laughed. Harry caught Seamus's eye, and Seamus winked. Snape, however, was not pleased. "Sit down!" he snapped at Hermione. "For your information, Potter, asphodel and wormwood may make a sleeping potion so powerful it is known as the Draught of Living Death. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and will save you from most poisons. As for monkshood and wolfsbane, they are the same plant, which also goes by the name of aconite. Well, why aren't you all copying that down?" There was a sudden rummaging for quills and parchment. Over the noise, Snape said, "And a point will be taken from Gryffindor House for your cheek, Potter." Things didn't improve for the Gryffindors as the potion lesson continued. Snape put them all into pairs and set them to mixing up a simple potion to cure boils. He swept along in his long black cloak, watching them weigh dried nettles and crush snake fangs, criticizing almost everyone except Malfoy, who he seemed to like. He was just telling everyone to look at the perfect way Malfoy had stewed his horned slugs when a cloud of acid green smoke and a loud hiss filled the dungeon. Neville had somehow managed to melt Seamus's cauldron into a twisted blob, and their potion was seeping across the stone floor, burning holes in people's shoes. Within seconds, the whole class was standing on their stools while Neville, who had been drenched in the potion when the cauldron collapsed, moaned in pain as angry red boils sprung up all over his arms and legs. "Idiot boy!" snarled Snape, clearing the spilled potion away with a wave of his hand. "I suppose you added the porcupine quills before taking the cauldron off the fire?" Neville whimpered as boils started to pop up all over his nose. "Take him to the hospital wing!" Snape spat at Seamus. And then he rounded on Harry and Ron, who had been working next to Neville. "You, Potter, why didn't you tell him not to add the quills? Thought it'd make you look good if he did it wrong, did you? That's another point you've lost for Gryffindor." This was so unfair that Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Ron kicked him behind their cauldron. "Don't push it," he muttered. "I've heard Snape can turn very, very nasty." As they climbed the steps out of the dungeon an hour later, Harry's mind was racing and his spirits were low. He'd lost 2 points for Gryffindor in his very first week. Why did Snape hate him so much? "Cheer up," said Ron. "Snape's always taking points off for Fred and George. Can I come and meet Hagrid with you?" At 5 to 3, they left the castle and made their way across the grounds. Hagrid lived in a small wooden house at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. A crossbow and a pair of galoshes were outside the front door. When Harry knocked, they heard a frantic scrambling from inside and several booming barks. Then Hagrid's voice rang out, saying, "Back, Fang, back!" Hagrid's big, hairy face appeared in the crack as he pulled the door open. "Hang on," he said. "Back, Fang!" He let them in, struggling to hold the collar of an enormous black boarhound. There was only one room inside. Hams and pheasants were hanging from the ceiling. A copper kettle was boiling in an open fire, and in the corner stood a massive bed with a patchwork quilt over it. "Make yourselves at home," said Hagrid, letting go of Fang, who bounded straight at Ron and started licking his ears. Like Hagrid, Fang was clearly not as fierce as he looked. "This is Ron," Harry told Hagrid, who was pouring boiling water into a large teapot and putting rock cakes onto a plate. "Another Weasley, eh?" said Hagrid, glancing at Ron's freckles. "I spent half my life chasing your twin brothers away from the forest." The rock cakes were shapeless lumps with raisins that almost broke their teeth. But Harry and Ron pretended to be enjoying them as they told Hagrid about their first lessons. Fang rested his head on Harry's knee and drooled all over his robes. Harry and Ron were delighted to hear Hagrid call Filch that old git. "And for that cat, Miss Norris, I'd like to introduce her to Fang sometime. Do you know, every time I go up to the school, she follows me everywhere. Can't get rid of her. Filch puts her up to it." Harry told Hagrid about Snape's lesson. Hagrid, like Ron, told Harry not to worry about it, that Snape liked hardly any of the students. "But he seemed to really hate me." "Rubbish," said Hagrid. "Why should he?" Yet Harry couldn't help thinking that Hagrid didn't quite meet his eyes when he said that. "How's your brother Charlie?" Hagrid asked Ron. "I liked him a lot. Great with animals." Harry wondered if Hagrid had changed the subject on purpose. While Ron told Hagrid all about Charlie's work with dragons, Harry picked up a piece of paper that was laying on the table under a tea cozy. It was a cutting from the Daily Prophet. Gringotts break-in latest. Investigations continued into the break-in at Gringotts on the 31st of July, widely believed to be the work of dark wizards and witches unknown. Gringotts goblins today insist that nothing had been taken. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied that same day. "But we're not telling you what was in there, so keep your noses out if you know what's good for you," said a Gringotts spokesgoblin that afternoon. Harry remembered Ron telling him on the train that someone had tried to rob Gringotts, but Ron hadn't mentioned the date. Hagrid, said Harry. That Gringotts break-in happened on my birthday. It might have been happening while we were there. There was no doubt about it. Hagrid definitely didn't meet Harry's eyes this time. He grunted and offered him another rock cake. Harry read the story again. The vault that was searched had in fact been emptied earlier that same day. Hagrid had emptied Vault 713, if you could call it emptying, taking out that grubby little package. Had that been what the thieves were looking for? As Harry and Ron walked back to the castle for dinner, their pockets weighed down with rock cakes that they'd been too polite to refuse, Harry thought that none of the lessons he'd had so far had given as much to think about as tea at Hagrid's. Had Hagrid collected that package just in time? Where was it now? And did Hagrid know something about Snape that he didn't want to tell Harry? Alright, that's 2 chapters for tonight. We're all done. Tomorrow night we will read chapters 9 and 10. Chapter 9 is called The Midnight Duel. We are about halfway through the book now.
Wow, that's a
Hey Joe, you're late. You missed the story. I just finished the first 2 chapters. Those 2 chapters. Okay.
Why do people keep getting off?
So Angie, are we gonna have a shot of whiskey now? Is that what's gonna happen? I hope you guys liked the story.
I bet they did.
Okay. Have a good night. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Have a nice day.
I'm sure you heard Damon.